Welcome back. This video will be a deep dive into battery swapping, the narratives around it, so the positives and negatives, and we'll be directly hearing from Shen, who is the leader of the battery swapping program, who's done a blog or an interview which is only in Chinese. And I mentioned it before in my last video that this is something that was actually translated by one of our NIO community members, a fellow investor, I guess, by Jason here. It triggered me to become one of his patrons here, proud investors. I would say that you may want to consider to do the same. It's just up to you. I think creators should be supported, and actually that creators should really want to make a business out of this. And he has translated this interview and has actually, posted it in English. And I'm hoping that he's fine with the fact that I will now go through those posts that he has made and give you like the most important bits in my point of view, and a little bit of context and my views on that. And because ultimately I would still support Jason for this work, even if this information would then be somewhere out free there, right? I just think he needs the support in order to start this business, in order to spend this time on it. And that's kind of my purpose with this video. Now let's walk through it. As you can see, it's kind of a lengthy thing, so I hope you don't get bored by it. It's maybe a little bit nerdy, but before we jump into that, NIO has actually announced that there will be a NIO Power Day on the 20th, so it's coming up very soon. And I was commenting it that I'm crossing my fingers that this will not be just a classy presentation, but actually giving us some hard facts. That was what I was also pointing out before, that we're kind of missing sometimes the real data. I think it's not helping with the trust of investors. It's making it hard for investors to understand where the company is going. And so I really like to see not only marketing presentations, but actually some great data points and views from NIO employees directly. And this one, we got it here only thanks to Jason, who has actually translated it, because usually that would be in Chinese, and so very hard to uncover, right? So Dr. Shen, he's the senior vice president of NIO and he's coming up with the whole battery swapping program. And there are some very interesting tidbits in this interview. So first of all, they are talking about that NIO cars prices have just been reduced by 30,000 yuan. So that was the price decrease of NIO cars, right? Which basically meant that those users who get the NIO car now cheaper do not longer enjoy the free battery swapping for life. And also some additional implications when it comes to the warranty. Now, this was, Shen in this interview, he gives a little bit more of a context here. He thinks that in the earlier days, this free swapping was kind of a good marketing approach. And I previously already compared here on the channel that, this is not kind of uncommon. Also, Tesla sold 300,000 Model X and Model S with lifetime free charging before switching to another model. And so it's kind of similar to where NIO is. But of course, the shorts used it to create this narrative that NIO is only there to spend all of your money and throw it into the bin, right? And so it's great to see a little bit from the customer, not the customer, the employee or founder internal perspective here, how this has evolved over time and what is the benefits of it, that they did it the way they've done it, like basically as a marketing incentive to raise awareness about the benefits of battery swapping. Now, the new situation is, of course, that they will charge a 30 yuan service fee, and then additionally the energy that is being used. And interestingly, this will also have the result that you won't use battery swapping if you can also just simply charge. For example, if you don't have to top up a lot of kilowatt hours, basically if your battery is not very empty. So that's also a nice mechanism here. Then they're talking a little bit about some narratives that are out there. It's good to see, for example, that Tesla had abandoned battery swapping in the past. And then Shen compares that, saying like, first of all, he's very polite here and saying, well, different companies and different approaches have worked at different times, and, not everyone is the same. He compares it with Better Place, which he said has the disadvantage that they are not a vehicle producer. And then for Tesla, it's also a different story, because in the United States, a vast country where the necessity for battery swapping may simply not just be as high. Also, he says, most users have home charging in the United States. And second, their open supercharging stations on highways are better suited to serve users. Lastly, the business model that Tesla established at the time had a slight flaw. They required users to leave their original battery at the swapping stations and retrieve it upon returning. Interesting point. I didn't know that personally. This approach significantly affected efficiency and was inconvenient for users. Moreover, some users might not necessarily return to the same swapping station. Considering these factors, I think their business model design was flawed, so it's not surprising that they couldn't sustain it. I would even question the fact that they even wanted to sustain it. As far as I'm aware, Tesla got granted lots of subsidies for battery swapping back in the days in the US, so from the local governments, and so they got millions in funding for battery swapping, but they didn't really take it very seriously if I'm looking at the fact that they only tested it with a focus group of around 100 users. And with 100 users, it's pretty hard to, have a significant outcome. And so I guess and I don't blame them, actually. For Tesla, in the early stages, it was possibly a way of funding and keeping the company liquid. Now, what else? What does he think makes the NIO successful is, firstly, the development of the EV industry is now more mature, so they come in at a different time for battery swapping. And secondly, because they were a startup from scratch, they can think it through and they don't have to, for example, like a legacy automaker, switch to it. And so they have been very focused on this model. And by the way, he also said in this interview that Li Bin was the person who immediately said, look, it's such a big pain point. We want to have battery swapping as a USP, and thereby giving the users a better user experience and cut through this range anxiety issue. And then further down in the interview, he's coming to the real juicy bits here, talking about also what the business case ultimately could be, and pointing out some stuff on the revenue side as well as on the cost side. Personally, he got more and more confident over the years, and the costs have become more optimized. And for example, they don't need longer a dedicated staff member at each station, and they're also seeing a couple of ways of improving the swap stations and the economies of it. For example, regarding the utilization of power grids capacity and participating in grid regulation. So this is also what we've discussed on this channel here before, that there are ways of monetizing battery swap stations in different ways. More details on that a little bit later. What are also nice anecdotes here in this interview is, for example, here one user who complained that initially, when he swapped for the first time, he wanted his own battery back. This is one of the, also from one of the arguments I hear sometimes, like users really want to own their own battery. For example, in this case, he also bought the battery, and they are still stuck in this ownership mentality. And also are quite frankly worried about the fact that they might get a battery that is, let's say, a lemon, not as good in quality back. But this user then later on became also angry at some point, because he required a battery swap during the springtime festival for a longer trip. And so once a user experienced the convenience of battery swapping, they won't go back. This is kind of a nice little story to tell Of course, that's not for everyone, but that's also something to consider whenever we hear about those people who are saying like, I want to own my battery, and this is the most important thing for me. Possibly those people have never experienced it. And this was even confirmed by a famous blogger in China, Xiaote. So he's actually a Tesla guy, but he later on bought an 85. And after his first battery swap, he never charged again and constantly praised the convenience of battery swapping on Weibo. What I also really like here is that he is actually telling facts in order to counter some of the narratives out there. For example, there's a joke about battery swapping taking 5 minutes and the queuing 2 hours. And what's the reality? They have the actual data for it. They have 50,000 to 60,000 battery swaps per day, and an average wait time for users around 5 to 6 minutes. And that's starting from when they place an order from a distance of 200 meters away to the battery swap station. I would add even here with the issue that I pointed out the other day of Tesla superchargers, they need to actually have some sort of a queuing management system, usually manually currently, for battery swap stations that actually even works digitally. So I said the average duration nationwide does not exceed 12 minutes for a battery swap, including everything around it, right? So including the wait time and so on. So this is real data. They monitor it daily, and we consider the time spent finding a charging station, scanning the code, unplugging the cable, etc. These are many more minutes involved that we actually also need to consider when talking about supercharging. And Shen is so blunt in going out and saying it's just that the industry, there are media and competitors who have their own agendas and they set the rhythm. So this is something that I've suspected for a long time, that there's lots of trash talking about NIO simply by competitors or media out there. NIO is starting to heavily fight back and suing some of the bloggers in China. And it's good to see finally an executive voicing this opinion. Have you ever heard about something like this from a NIO executive before? I haven't. Another myth that he is debunking here from his point of view is about the speed of supercharging, and most notably here about the 800 volt technology that has become increasingly popular as a marketing tool, for example, with Xpeng and Li Auto. And, some people say, well, battery swapping over time will just not be competitive anymore. So this isn't a very important bit. Let me read it fully. 800 volts is just a higher voltage, which means that under the same charging power, the current can be smaller, or under the same charging current, the charging power can be slightly increased. The 800 volt technology is something we also work on at NIO, and if it develops well, it will also help NIO charging because it allows faster charging of individual battery cells. In fact, the second and third generation stations we are currently deploying are compatible with 800 volts. This is also something that I've uncovered with some patents before here on the channel. As for 800 volt fast charging, I think there is a question that an ordinary user may not immediately realize. When a user buys a car, they only see the manufacturer's advertising, mentioning that they have 800 volts and can charge in 10 minutes and so on. But is it actually the situation like that? Not necessarily. What can user actually get when they charge each time? There are several factors to consider. The first is how much charging power the battery can accept. The second is the power capacity of a charging pile, and the third is how much power the power grid can provide at the moment. The user can only get the minimum value among these three power levels. Very important point. As for the battery, although we talk about batteries that can handle 4C or even claim 5C, it doesn't mean they can charge at that fast speed all the time. When you charge around 80 to 90%, most batteries will enter a trickle charging state, gradually slowing down the charging speed. If someone insists on arguments saying that they will only charge from 20% to 80% each time, it's possible, but based on the tens of thousands of charging behaviors we've seen in the backend every day, we find that most users, when they come to charge, they feel like they might as well fully charge the battery since they're already there, and the extra few minutes don't matter. So this objectively extends the charging time, causing frustration with the people in the line. They may think you only take 10 minutes, but then you take 20 minutes. So that's one aspect. As for charging pile, for example, like NIO's battery swap station, we also have charging piles next to them, and they are currently less than 500 kilowatts. But honestly speaking, not many users will have the opportunity to use 500 kilowatts. Even if their vehicle can handle 500 kilowatts, I still need to optimize the power allocation between the battery swapping station and the charging pile. Only when the battery swap station's batteries are fully charged or don't need charging can I release more power to the charging pile. It's same for every charging station. For example, Tesla's current supercharging stations in Europe, most of them have around 250 kilowatts of power with 4 piles. So if there's only one car charging, it gets 250 kilowatts. And if there are 2 cars charging, each of them gets 120 kilowatts. If 4 cars charge together, they only get about 60 kilowatts. Although the power of the pile is enough, it still depends on how much power the power grid can provide at a time, or how much power your installation can get. In addition, when you build a charging station, you need to consider how many piles you should install. If you want to install 4 or 5 500 kilowatt piles, it's impossible for the power grid to provide you with 2000 kilowatts of power capacity. At most, it will provide you with a little over 1000 kilowatts. Anyways, I think even the best ultra-fast charging cannot replace battery swapping. Furthermore, when it comes to charging, the higher the charging power and the more frequent the charging, the more it will impact the battery's lifespan and safety. So battery swapping stations are actually a complex system that provides users with a smaller and better experience. In short, we give the users a simple and good experience while dealing with the complexity ourselves. This is a typical system that brings high efficiency and systemized benefits. So that's not even touching the whole ecosystem, but this is very, very well explained. And, I would love that people just go out there and make infographics about all of this. By the way, if you think you could do that, reach out to me. I'm looking for talent who can help me with stuff like that. If NIO's not doing it, maybe I can do it on their behalf. Both charging stations and battery swap stations can contribute to grid regulation to some extent. However, after separating battery from the vehicle primarily relying on battery swapping can play a stronger role. So this is the importance of the separation of the vehicle body to the battery. Why it doesn't make sense that battery is in the ownership of the customer, because only then it can essentially pull the right incentives together for the whole ecosystem, that a user doesn't mind any battery degradation or earning money on this asset. This is why NIO transfers the ownership to the battery asset management company and thereby has made this very important split, both on the financial side in terms of the taxation, but also on the hardware side and the business model side. And also this decoupling happens on the user experience side. So for battery swap stations, we have decoupled the charging process from the user's access to electricity. Whenever a user comes, the swapping station can provide a fully charged battery. The remaining batteries in a swap station can be charged according to the grid strategies, meaning they can be used to balance the grid. This is something that cannot happen on a supercharger because based on that, you would actually have an implication on the actual user experience of the supercharger. Not only would the user, not be willing to actually, for example, feed back energy into the grid system from their own battery, but also it may have implications of, for example, lower charging speed and so on. And this is where it comes to the most important part of the interview, speaking about the actual economics and making a quite good example here. Currently, there are many calculations being made about the economics of swap stations. Let's not consider the income from swap stations and focus solely on the cost savings achieved through energy storage. It's quite impressive. For example, charging stations allows users to charge anytime, and we settle the electricity cost based on the current electricity price. On the other hand, for swapping stations, regardless of when the user comes, there's always an opportunity. During off-peak hours, when the electricity is cheaper, there are fewer users coming for swapping. At that time, I can fully charge all of the batteries and bring them to the periods of normal or peak electricity demand. Let's do some calculations. We can save significant amount of electricity bills every day, ranging from off-peak to peak hours. The price difference can be around 0.6 to 1 yuan per kilowatt hour. That's only in China. Let's take the conservative estimate of 0.6 yuan. If on average a swapping session requires around 60 kilowatt hours, the cost saved per session would be around 36 yuan. Multiply that by 20 battery swaps and it amounts to 600 yuan per day. If we optimize further between normal and peak hours, we can save even more. By taking advantage of different time periods for charging, we can save around 1,000 yuan per day. That's 30,000 yuan per month and 360,000 yuan per year. So that's the use case for grid balancing and how this can generate a revenue stream. Now it's getting even more important. Let's assume the investment for a supercharging station is 1 million yuan, while a swap station costs 3 million yuan. Let's see how much electricity they can contribute per day, because the value created is the electricity that goes into the user's vehicles. Let's assume a charging station with 4 superchargers can handle around 20 sessions per day, with each session provided 50 kilowatt hours. That's the mainstream charging station capacity with 630 kilowatt ampere transformer, which means that they provide 1,000 to 2,000 kilowatt hours per day, depending on their operational capacity. Now, what about swapping stations? On average, we have around 40 swaps per day, and the average capacity is around 2,000 kilowatt hours. Plus the nearby supercharging stations, we can easily reach around 6,000 kilowatt hours per day. So the electricity provided by swapping stations, which goes into the vehicles, is roughly 3 times the electricity provided by charging stations. If my investment is 3 times higher, then the unit cost is the same in terms of investment efficiency. Very important point about return on capital. And I haven't even considered the electricity savings and other factors that we have discussed earlier. So from an investment efficiency perspective, I believe the overall efficiency of swapping station is similar or even higher than that of a charging station. Why? Because charging stations can only fulfill the charging process, whereas swapping stations, as I mentioned earlier, can participate in grid regulation or balancing, generate income through battery upgrades, and benefit from the flexibility of battery upgrades. If we look at our first generation to the third generation stations, the efficiency of our swap stations has significantly improved. Here's something interesting. The cost of the swap stations itself has hardly changed from the first to the third generation, but the number of batteries it accommodates has increased from 5 to 21. The cost of serving a single battery or a single swapping station has dramatically decreased. So we are continuously optimizing our product design and have full confidence in controlling the cost and achieving higher value and efficiency for swap stations. So these are kind of good insights, right? Somewhere buried in a podcast that is only available in Chinese. I would really love to see infographics and material in English. Maybe the NIO Day or the NIO Power Day is actually a great way of communicating something like this. I think there could even be more added here, like for example, here about those improvements between the different generations. I think this is quite valuable. You don't even have to say what is the exact cost of the battery swap station, but giving some efficiency increases. This is something that we often see in each of every investor presentations for Tesla, for example. And so it's very, very easy to digest for investors here. So the electricity volume provided by swapping stations into vehicles is actually 3 times the electricity provided by charging stations. If my investment is 3 times higher, then the value created is also 3 times higher. So the unit cost is the same. And this is exactly how I'm hoping NIO could continue to communicate such kind of really great tidbits about NIO's business model here. Another factor to consider here is that swap stations occupy fewer parking spaces and provide higher swapping efficiency to serve users, especially from a service area which is interested in either building supercharger stations or maybe swap stations. This is something to consider because, of course, they want to increase the throughput of people, thereby generating more revenues, more transactions. And here, the lower footprint of the smaller footprint of battery swap stations come in quite handy, literally. He's also quite honest that he really doesn't know yet if battery swap stations help a lot in car sales, other than that users hopefully get the core benefit and USP that it's simply providing a better user experience and it's saving time. But it seems that NIO hasn't found any metric yet to really track whether or not there is a big implication on the car sales. That would be a great number to come out and to state during an earnings call. Maybe we'll see that going forward also regarding the acceptance possibly of paying for battery swaps, but also as NIO hopefully executes on a plan of building out 1,000 swap stations during this year and how this may implicate a growth in sales numbers. There are many more insights in that, so you can see it's a very long interview, and there are more insights, for example, about battery swap stations in the US and Europe and what kind of what they're seeing there. And I'll read it for yourself on one of these Patreon posts here by Jason. For me, I'm now personally very excited about the NIO Power Day and hoping that there will be some sort of announcement, maybe on the partnering side, maybe on such of these economics about battery swapping or their future plans, and making it hopefully more tangible for investors in order to, well, actually maybe not even only investors, but also from a consumer side, right? You really want to know what's going on with the company and what are the plans. So that's a great opportunity there, and why I'm pointing out that these are things that I think the NIO community and also NIO themselves could work on doing a better job on actually getting the message out there. For example, for me today, I spent roughly about 4 hours maybe on creating this video. So for me, the opportunity cost here is that, if I do a client project, I would charge, let's say, around 2,000 euros on a daily rate. Now I spent half a day to make this video. The video makes maybe 30 euros in revenue. So it's kind of a sacrifice here that I'm doing. But I think that's why NIO and the community should find ways of building a business around all of this. NIO is a platform business. NIO is an ecosystem, and there is much more to uncover. And I see quite a few creators out there like Jason or Frank who are providing great content to the NIO community and are doing a great favor to NIO. And that needs to be rewarded in my point of view. A bit of a rant from my side for today. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.